Hi guys, welcome to week 7 of our virtual online mythology classes. I hope you're all doing well, finding things to entertain yourselves. I know it gets boring being at home this long. I hope you're staying healthy, making smart choices so that you stay healthy. So we are picking up our story that we've been reading for the last 2 weeks. But before we jump back into the story, if you have access to paper and pencil or markers, something to draw with, go ahead and grab that so you can either draw what you're hearing about or draw whatever you want to while you're listening. So we are still in the middle of this story from the Micmac tribe, which started off with these fairy women, and they were married to this one man, and then they ran away, and they ended up being married to some stars, and then they went back down to earth after living with the stars for a while, and they were caught up in the top of this tree, and this devil kind of character who likes to joke around with people and cause them problems, named Lox, helps them down from the tree. And I'm trying to remember exactly. Yeah, if you don't remember, go back and watch the last week's video. So last week we read the middle section of the story, and the week before is when we started the story. It's a really long story. And then it goes on to talk about Lox's different adventures. He ends up, the women don't want to marry him, and so they make this house that has these ants and knives and like bees and stuff to sting him, and they kind of play a trick on him, and so he goes into the house and gets cut and stung, and ants crawl all over him. So he's chasing after these women, and in the process of chasing after them, he gets into a whole nother side story of things going on. We haven't heard about the women in a while. And he has died while crossing a river because he was rude to the ferryman taking him across, and so he drowned. But because he has some magical powers, he came back to life. But the two boys that brought him back to life, he decides instead of thanking them, he's going to cause problems for them. So he sends them off on some weird errand and then goes to their house. And when he can't trick their mom into thinking that he's one of them, he kills her and cuts off her head and puts it in a pot. So then all of her relatives, when they figure out what happened, start chasing after him, and none of them can catch him until the big eagle, who is the head of the family, catches him, flies him up really high in the air, and then drops him down. And he's so high up that he falls for an entire day. And right before he hits the ground, he whispers a spell saying, "Please protect my backbone," or something like that. And so when he hits the ground, and I remember I laughed a little bit about this last week. It was very violent and graphic in how they described that he kind of just splattered all over. Like he was not intact, but his backbone was still intact and still safe, and that's where he keeps his life apparently. But everything else of him just kind of went everywhere when he hit the ground. And that's where we left off last week. So that recaps the story. If you can follow from that, I guess you don't need to go back and watch the other videos. So he has just hit the ground. Hold on. I had found my place. Where did it go? My goodness. Yeah, sorry, the story skipped somewhere else, and I'm trying to find my place again. Okay, so he hits the ground after falling for a whole day. Everything goes everywhere, but his backbone lay whole, and this was his life. And in a few days after, his younger brother came by, who, seeing the dire mess, exclaimed, "Hey, what is all this?" Whereupon a voice came from the bone, crying, "Nulugun baho! Ho, my leg, come hither!" And a leg came unto the spine. Then the voice cried, "Nepetunegum haho! Ho, my arm, come hither!" And when the last fragment had come, he arose, the same indomitable Lox as ever, even the Indian devil or Wolverine, who never says die, and whom nothing can kill, and who is hard to put away. Okay, so after a few days, he just starts calling out to his different body parts, and they come, and he's fine. Now the two brothers went on till they came to the top of a high mountain, where there lay a very great round rock, or a mighty boulder. And being full of fun, they turned it over with great sticks, saying to it, "Now let us run a race." Then it rolled downhill till it stopped at the foot. They rushed along by it all the time, and when it rested, they jeered it, and bade it race with them again when it so listed. Okay, so now where the story is completely unrelated to what it was before, they found a rock on a mountain, and they're using sticks to roll it downhill, and they're racing it. They're running along with it. Okay. And truly they had not long to wait, for soon after, as they sat cooking their food, they heard a mighty commotion as of something coming with dreadful speed through the forest. And lo, it was the stone in dire wrath, which, having rested a little while, came rushing through the forest, crashing the mighty trees like grass with a roar like thunder, leaving a smooth road behind it in the roughest wilderness. Up and after the sorcerers flew the stone, and the younger slipped aside like a snake. But the elder had scarcely time to utter his magic charm, Nugun uskuduskuch, let my backbone remain uninjured, ere the awful rock rolled down upon him, crushing his bones and mashing his flesh. Yet the spine was unhurt. It remained sound as ever. Wow. Okay, so it sounds like Lox is really bad at not getting crushed and smushed by different things. So they were racing this stone, and then they were kind of making fun of it. And I guess because they're magicians, the stone came to life and came rolling after them, really angry that they had said mean things to it. And the one brother is able to get out of the way in time before the stone rolls over him, but Lox is not able to. But before the stone gets to him, he is able to whisper his spell to save his backbone. And so he gets smushed by the rock, but his backbone is still okay. So now he's died. This is his third time dying in this story, I guess. Although I guess he's not technically dead because his backbone is where his life is, but basically dead. And the stone went on and ever on, till the sound of its roar died away in the breeze and afar in the wilderness. Then the younger brother turned to the backbone and said, "Kagui wechismuktumun, why are you lying there?" And bearing this charm, the bone called aloud, "Nitenin baho, my body ho," and "Nulugun baho, my leg ho." And so with the rest of the members as before, until he that was decomposed was now recomposed. Yes, and composed perfectly. And then he that was dead, but was now alive, arose, and said as one awaking, "What have I been doing?" So his brother told him all. Okay, so he's come back to life again. Then he was greatly angered, and when the wolverine is angry, it is not a little. And he said in his wrath, "Shall I, that am the devil of the woods himself, be slain by birds and stones, and not be revenged?" So they went onwards through the woods till they found the great rock. They followed in the path of the broken trees, even by the trees did they track it, which having found, they built a fire around it, with great stones for hammers, they broke it, and ever more and still smaller, till it was all mere dust, for their souls were sore for revenge. Okay, so he wants revenge on the rock, so they track the rock down, and then they crush it with stone hammers until it's dust. So they kill the rock. Okay. When lo, a great wonder, for the spirit of the old rock, even that which was itself, turned all the dust to black flies, into the stinging and evil things which drive men and beasts mad, so that its hatred and spite might be carried out on all living creatures unto the end of time. Okay, so the spirit of the rock that they just killed turns into a bunch of flies and bugs that are going to annoy people from now on. And having had their ill will of the rock and seen it become flies, the two went through the forest and so on till they came to a village of good honest folk. And knowing what manner of men they were, Lox resolved to forthwith play them an evil trick, for in all life there was nothing half so dear to him as to make mischief. The worse, the better. Okay. So now they go to a village, and it's a village full of good people. And he's like, "Hey, let's mess with them. That sounds fun." And this time it came into his head that it would be a fine piece of wit to go into the town as a girl and get married and see what would come of it, trusting to luck to fashion a sad fool out of somebody. So, having made himself into a delicate young beauty, richly attired, he entered the place, and truly the town was soon agog over the new guests. And the young chief of the tribe, wanting her, won her without waste of time. Truly there lieth herein some mystery. I know not what, only this I know, that there are in all towns certain folks who, by means of magic or meddling, always find out everything about everybody, and then tittle-tattle thereof. Now, albeit Lox had utterly abjured all the sinfulness of manhood, and had made a new departure in an utterly new direction, saying not a word thereof to anyone, yet in a brief measure of time, one here, another there, Jack in a corner, and Jane by the bush, began to whisper of a strange thing, and hint that all was not as it should be, and whatever the chief might think, that in their minds matters were going wrong in his wigwam. Okay, so he goes to this town, he makes himself into a girl, and he marries the chief of the town. Yeah, that's basically it. I think he's planning on making a fool of the chief. Now Lox, knowing all this thread as soon as it was spun, began to think it high time to show his hand in the game. And what was the amazement of all the town to hear one fine evening that the chief's wife would soon be a mother. And when the time came, Dame Lox informed her husband that, according to the custom of her people, she must be left utterly alone till he was a father and the babe born. And when in due time the cry of a small child was heard in the lodge of the women waiting, ran in, and received from the mother the little one, abundantly rolled in many wrappers, which they took to the chief. But what was his amazement, when, having unrolled the package, he found under one skin after another, tied up hard, yet another sewed up, and yet again, as the inmost kernel of this nut, the little withered, wizened dead, and dried shrivelment of an unborn moose calf, which pleased the chief so much that, dashing Master Moose into the fire, he seized his tomahawk and ran to his lodge to make his first morning call on the mother. Okay, so Lox, pretending to be the girl who is the chief's wife, has a baby. And when the baby is given to the chief, it is an unborn moose baby that's been tied up and sewed up in a bunch of animal skins. And the chief is so mad that he grabs his tomahawk and he runs to go see his wife, who is Lox, remember? But Master Lox was now a man again, and expecting this call and not wishing to see visitors, had with his brother fled to the woods, and that rapidly. And in the rush he came to a river, and seeing a very high waterfall, thought of a rare device whereby he might elude pursuit. For he with his brother soon built a dam across the top with trees and earth, so that but little water went below. And lying in an eave concealed with care, he imitated the boo of a falling stream with quaint and wondrous skill. And there he lay, and no man wist thereof. But verily the wicked one is caught in his own snare, and even so it befell Master Lox. For, as he bid, the water above, having gathered to a great lake, burst the dam so that it all came down upon him at once and drowned him, nor was there any great weeping for him that ever I heard of. So here he passes out of this story, and does not come into it again. But whether he went for good and all out of this life is doubtful, since I find him living again in so many rare, strange histories, that it has become a proverb that Lox never dies. Okay, so that's the end of Lox's story, but we still got more story after this. So, expecting the chief to come see him really mad, he and his brother run away, and as a way of kind of hiding, they make a dam to stop the water in the stream, and it's somewhere where they can hide, and he can just pretend to be part of the stream there. And he fools them. Nobody can find him. But then the dam, there's so much water built up that it breaks the dam, and all the water comes down, and it drowns him. So they're saying that he's not in the rest of the story, but he could crop up again. They don't know whether he's dead for sure, but People say that Lox never dies, and he died like 3 times in this story and came back to life. So I have a feeling he probably ended up coming back to life as long as his backbone was fine. Okay. Now the tale returns to the 2 little weasels, or ermines, or water maids, poor souls who had such a hard life. Okay, so remember, these are actually the fairy women. In the beginning of the story, they were called fairy women, but then as the story went on, they started calling them weasels. So that's the 2 women that we're talking about here. And it happened that, fleeing from Master Lox, they came at evening to a deserted village and entered a wigwam to pass the night. But the elder, being the wiser and somewhat of a witch in the bud, mistrusted the place, deeming it not so empty as it seemed. And beholding by the door, lying on the ground, the neckbone of a man or some other animal, she warned her sister that she should in no wise offend it or treat it lightly, to which the younger replied by giving it a kick, which sent it flying, and by the otherwise treating it with scorn and disdain. Okay, really, in all of these stories, as soon as somebody says, don't do that, the person always does it, and I don't get it. How stupid can you be? Okay, so they find this place, and they find the neck bone of something. And the older sister, she's kind of a witch, and she has a sense for things. And so she senses that they need to treat that neck bone well. And she tells her sister that. And the sister's reply is to kick it and be rude to it. Okay. Then they laid them down to sleep, but before their slumber came, they heard a doleful, bitter voice chanting aloud and shouting. And it was Chamach Kegwich, or the neck bone, bewailing the scorn that had been put upon him, and reviling them with all manner of curses. Then the elder said, there, truly I said it. It's a nice way of saying, told you so. I knew you would be our death if you did not mind me. It being in all cases an esteemed solace for every woman and most men to say, I told you so. But the younger, being well nigh frightened to a corpse, in a soft whisper implored the elder to let her hide herself in her roll of hair, which the voice mocking her repeated, adding thereto all the reviling and railing that Mityahunt, the devil himself, ever yet invented, and abusing her so for her past life, and exhorting her so for all the sins, slips, and slops therein, that even the impenitent little weasel repented and wept bitterly. Howbeit, no further harm came to them beyond this, so that the next morning they went their way in peace, and I warrant you, Master Neckbone got no kicks that day from them departing. Okay, so that night, the Neckbone doesn't hurt them, but it does spend the whole night telling the younger sister about all of the horrible things in her life. And so she's crying and scared, but it doesn't actually hurt them at all. And so in the morning, she's learned to respect the Neckbone, and they go on their way. Then, coming to a river, they saw on the other side a handsome young man holding a bow, and to him they called, making their usual offer to become his wives, and all for no greater thing than to carry them over the ferry. They sure are quick to offer themselves as wives. So in this case, they're offering to this guy, hey, we'll be your wife if you take us across the river. And this man's name was Sea Witch. And to please them, he did indeed pass them over in his canoe. But as for taking them home, he said that he had housekeepers in store, and as many as he needed just then, and that of a kind who kept him very busy. So they went their way onwards. And coming anon to the great sea, they beheld yet another canoe with 2 men therein, and these were Quemu, the loon, and Maguis, the scapegrace. And embarking with them, Loon soon began to admire the girls greatly, and saying many sweet things, he told them that he dwelt in the Wigam territory, or in the land of the Oialkesk, of which he himself was one. But the Maguis whispered to them aside that they should put little trust in what he told them, for Loon was a great liar. Now when they came to the land of the Oialkesk, they were amazed at the beauty of the people, and saw that all in that land was lovely, nor did they themselves seem less marvelously fair to the men therein. Indeed, the poor little weasels began to see the end of their sorrows, for, being water fairies, these seabirds were nigh akin to them, and there was a great feast, a great dance, and great games held in honor of their arrival. And the two finest young sea duck men, utterly unheeding the old loon, who believed indeed that they were his own wives, carried them off, and nothing loath wedded them. Okay, so the guy who takes them across the river doesn't want them as wives. He says, I've got a lot of housekeepers. They keep me busy. Then the women meet these two men, Loon and Scapegrace. And Loon likes to brag to them a lot, and he really likes them, and he kind of considers them his wives. But the other guy, Maguis, he tells them on the side that don't trust anything Loon says. He's kind of a liar who makes things up. So they get back to his land, and everyone is beautiful there. And all of the men there think that the women are beautiful too. And so two of the men, two of the finest sea duck men, even though Loon says that these two women are his wives, these two men carry the fairy women off, the weasel fairy women, and wed them. And it was in this wise. There was a canoe race, and Kwemu, being bitterly angry that he was held of so little account in the sea duck land, went forth with the rest, and paddling far outside, upset his canoe, and making as if he were drowning, called to the weasels to come and save him. But the sea ducks laughed and said, Let him alone. Truly he will never drown. We know him. And the race ended. They went ashore in peace. So Loon is angry, and so at this big canoe race, he pretends to be drowning so that the women will come save him. But the men tell the women, nah, he pulls this kind of stuff. Don't trust him. He's fine. He's not going to drown. And that night they danced late, and the weasels, being better pleased with the two handsome sea ducks than with the Loon, forthwith divorced themselves out of hand, and at once married them, going to where their canoe lay to pass the bridal night. Okay, so I guess they were kind of married to the Loon, but they decided they don't like him, so they divorce him to go with these two new guys. Now Loon had not gone to the dance, but sat at home nursing his vengeance till he was well nigh mad. And as the weasels did not return, he went forth and sought them. And this he did so carefully that at last he found all four by the sea sound asleep. Whereupon he, with his knife, slew the young men, and being in great fear of their friends, took his canoe and went down the river to kill a deer. But not daring to return, and being mad for loss of the weasels, and fearing to fall into the hands of the enemy, he in despair took his knife and killed himself. Yet the weasels, who had seen the deed done, did not betray him, for there was at least so much truth left in them, and they lived with the sea ducks, and I doubt not went on marrying and mischief making after their wont, even unto the end of their days, and their kind are not dead as yet in any land. Okay, that's the end of the story. So at the end, we had recapped that the two women divorced the Loon and went with two new guys. So the Loon tries to track them down to find where they are, and he does find them. He finds them with their new husbands, and he kills the two husbands. And then he realizes he's kind of in trouble and that people are probably going to try and kill him too. So he runs for it. And he gets pretty far away, but then he decides he's going to kill himself also. So the two new husbands are dead. The Loon is dead, but the two weasel women are still alive. The two weasel fairy women are still alive. And they know that it was him that killed their new husbands, but they don't tell anyone that. And the story says that they continue to live with the sea ducks in this land of the beautiful people. And they keep on marrying people and causing trouble. And that is the end of that very, very long story. So I'm glad that we heard from the women again, because that's kind of where the story started off. And for a while, they just kind of disappeared while we heard about Lox a little bit. And had kind of his crazy adventures. So, man, that is a beast of a story. A lot happened in it. I will say it was pretty entertaining, even though it did get gruesome and a little violent at times, with all of Lox's deaths and with those murders at the end. So, what did you guys think of that story? It definitely is a long one. If you did miss the first few parts and you want to hear them, if you go back to last week's video, well, not last week's video, but the week before that, That's where we started the story, and then last week we read the middle section, and then this was the end of it. All right, so let me look and see. Now I'm scared of all these stories being really, really long. Let me see how long this next one is. You know, I think we'll have time for this next story today. So this one is called Rabbit and Otter, the Bungling Host. Wait, hold on. Okay, so I think this is going to be another telling of a story we've had a few times of an animal going to eat with another animal, seeing how they do things and being like, oh, I can do that. And then because they have different talents and abilities, when they try and do it, they end up hurting themselves or looking foolish. I think this is going to be another one of those stories, is what it's looking like. There were two wigwams. Otter lived in one with his grandmother, and Rabbit lived with his grandmother in the other. One day, Rabbit started out and wandered over to visit Otter in his camp. When Rabbit entered Otter's wigwam, Otter asked if he had anything to eat at home. No, replied Rabbit. So Otter asked his grandmother if she would cook something for Rabbit, but she told him she had nothing to cook. So Otter went out to the pond directly in front of his camp, jumped in, and caught a nice long string of eels. Meanwhile, Rabbit was looking to see how Otter would catch his food. With Otter's great success, Rabbit thought he could do the same. Rabbit then invited Otter to come over to his camp the next day. His grandmother had already told him that she had nothing to cook for their meal, but asked him to go out and find something. Then Rabbit went out to the same pond where Otter had found the string of eels. But he could get nothing, not one fish, as he could not dive no matter how hard he tried. In the meantime, his grandmother was waiting. She sent Otter out to find Rabbit, who searched and finally found him at the same pond, soaked and with nothing to show for his efforts. What's the matter with you? He asked. I'm trying hard to get us some food, he replied. So friendly Otter jumped into the pond and again caught a string of fish, this time for Rabbit's grandmother to cook for their dinner. Then Otter went home. The next day, Rabbit started out to visit Woodpecker. When he reached Woodpecker's wigwam, Rabbit found him at home with his grandmother. She got out her large pot to cook a meal, but said, We have nothing to cook in the pot. So Woodpecker went out front to a dry tree trunk, from which he picked a quantity of meal. This he took to his grandmother, and she made a good dinner for them. Rabbit had watched how Woodpecker obtained his meal, so he invited Woodpecker over to visit him. The very next day, Woodpecker arrived at Rabbit's wigwam for a visit. Rabbit asked his grandmother to hang up her pot and cook them some dinner. But we have nothing to cook, she replied. So Rabbit went outside with his birch vessel to fill it with meal. He tried to dig out the meal with his nose, as he had seen Woodpecker do. Soon Woodpecker came out to see what caused the delay. Poor Rabbit was hurt, with his nose flattened out and split in the middle from trying to break into the wood. Woodpecker left to return to his own wigwam without any dinner. Ever since then, Rabbit has had to carry around his split nose. Okay, that's not the end of the story, but I hope you guys are catching what's happening here. He goes to eat with Otter. He sees that Otter dives into the water to get food, and he's like, oh, I could do that. So he invites Otter over, and he tries to do the same thing, but he's not able to dive in the water because he's not an otter. He's a rabbit. So he doesn't end up getting any food. Then he goes to Woodpecker's house for dinner, and he sees that Woodpecker uses his nose, his beak, to hit into the wood and get a bunch of bugs and food there. And so he's like, hey, I can do that. So he invites Woodpecker over. He tries the same thing, but he doesn't have a hard beak like Woodpecker. So he's been trying to do this with his soft rabbit nose. And he's been doing it so hard that his nose splits down the center and gets cracked. And they say that's why Rabbit from now on has a split nose. Okay, poor guy. He needs to realize he doesn't have the same talents as everyone else. All right. Another day, desperate for food, Rabbit thought he would go and steal some of Otter's eels. He got into the habit of doing this every second night. Towards spring, Otter began to wonder where his eels had gone as his barrel was getting low. Otter thought he would keep watch and soon found Rabbit's foot tracks and said to himself, for that, I am going to kill Otter. Kill Rabbit. My bad. Otter's going to kill Rabbit. Now Rabbit knew what was going on in Otter's mind, and when Otter reached Rabbit's camp, he fled. Otter asked Rabbit's grandmother, where has Rabbit gone? I don't know, she replied. Last night he brought home some eels, then he went away. He has been stealing my eels, said Otter. Now I'm going to kill him. So began Otter's search for Rabbit, who guessed Otter would be trailing him. Otter began to gain on Rabbit, who picked up a small chip and asked it to become a wigwam. Immediately, the chip became a wigwam, and Rabbit became an old man sitting inside. When Otter came along and saw the wigwam, he also saw the gray-headed old man sitting inside. He pretended to be blind. Otter did not know that this was Rabbit himself. Out of pity for him, Otter gathered some firewood for the old man and asked if he had heard Rabbit passing by. No, I have not heard anyone today. So Otter continued his search. Okay, so Rabbit apparently has some magic powers. He makes this wigwam and makes himself into an old man. So when, did I say Rabbit or Otter? Rabbit is what I meant if I said Otter. When Otter catches up to him, he sees the old man and doesn't realize it's Rabbit. So he keeps looking. Later, Rabbit left his wigwam and started out on another road. Otter could not pick up Rabbit's trail, so he returned to the wigwam. Not only was it empty, but gone entirely. Only a chip remained in its place. Otter then saw Rabbit's tracks where he had jumped out of the wigwam. This trick made Otter very angry, and he cried out, "You won't fool me again!" Otter followed the new trail. When Rabbit sensed Otter was closing in on him, he picked up another chip and wished it to become a house, and there was the house ready to live in. Otter came along and was suspicious as soon as he saw the house with a veranda across the front and a big gentleman walking back and forth, all dressed in white, reading a paper. This, of course, was Rabbit himself, but Otter did not know it. He asked the big gentleman, "Have you seen Rabbit go this way?" The man appeared not to hear, so Otter asked him again. The gentleman replied in pidgin English a phrase that meant, "Never saw Rabbit." But Otter looked hard at him and noticed the man's feet, which were Rabbit's feet. So Otter felt certain this was his prey. The big gentleman gave Otter some bread and wine, and Otter left hurriedly to again track Rabbit back to the house. He came to the place, but the house was not there. Otter could see the tracks where Rabbit started running away. "He'll never have a chance to trick me again, that's the last time," declared Otter. Rabbit soon came to the head of a bay where there was a very small island, so small that a person could almost jump over it. He jumped onto the island and wished it to become a man-of-war. Otter came to the same shore and saw the big ship anchored there, and the big gentleman in a white suit walking the deck. Otter called to him, "You can't trick me now, you're the man I want." Then Otter swam out toward the ship to board it and to kill Rabbit. But the big gentleman sang out to the sailors, "Shoot him! His skin is worth a lot of money in France." The end. So sometimes these stories end a little abruptly and with it not being quite clear what exactly happened. So Otter keeps chasing Rabbit. Rabbit keeps like magicking these houses and stuff like that and turning himself into a man. Otter is getting pretty annoyed that he hasn't caught Rabbit yet. And at the end, there's this big ship. And Otter sees the man on the ship and says, "You're not going to fool me again. I know you're the one I want." And as he's swimming towards the ship, the man calls out to his sailors to shoot Otter because his skin is worth a lot of money. That's it. So I think we're meant to assume that maybe Otter does end up dying. I don't know. What do you guys think happens after this? Sometimes the stories don't really have an ending. So I like us to kind of figure out what we think happened after the end of this story. You know, it's one of those ones I think Otter might have died, which I'm a little sad about because he was the one that was getting stolen from. I mean, maybe he shouldn't have been so vengeful, but what are you going to do in these stories? All right, so that is all we have time for today. But next week, we'll be reading a few more animal stories. The next one is Rabbit and the Moon Man. And then after that, we have Raccoon Learns a Lesson. We'll probably get through a few stories each week now that we finished that really, really long one today. So I hope you guys enjoyed the stories today. I hope that you are continue to do well, and I'll post another one of these next week. Stay healthy and stay safe.